Now take a moment and chill with Primo.
Welcome back to the second part in our series on game development in New Zealand. With award-winning games such as Shatter, a smartphone publishing arm showing great promise, and the much-anticipated Rugby Challenge in the final stages of development, Wellington-based She is New Zealand's most high-profile game developer. We sat down with Mario Winans, managing director at She, and had a wide-ranging discussion about the past, present and future of both the company and the Kiwi industry.
Yeah, I'm one of the three original founders, and I guess all three of us, myself, Tyrone Macaulay and Stuart Middleton, we'd known each other for years beforehand, had similar interests in video games and board games and role-playing games, and had kind of toyed around with game systems and redesigning stuff, and kind of put aside the idea of starting a game company actually as we grew up and went to university and got jobs in the real world. And it wasn't really until Sony released the home programmable PlayStation, which you could kind of plug into a PC and start coding for a console, that we thought there's maybe an opportunity to do something here, and sort of thought, well, our degrees are actually quite well suited to starting a game company, so why not give it a go? So that was the idea, and sort of being the young naive males that we were, we just started.
Like many aspiring developers, the trio showed no lack of ambition.
Like many game studios at the time, wanted to start creating the next big RPG, and that wasn't really the smartest thing to do with a team of three people, but again, young and naive. But really the first game that we did end up being a PlayStation 1 title, Championship Surfer, which was released by Mattel and Ubisoft in September, October 2000, somewhere around there.
But before winning the Championship Surfer subcontract from now embattled Australian studio Chrome, the founders of She had to fund their work personally.
We were, for a couple of years actually, working day jobs, so sort of doing contract work, 9 to 5, getting home, working from about 6 till 2 o'clock in the morning on game technology or design or whatever it might have been. So we spent a couple of years doing that and kind of building up expertise in technology and trying to get a deal or a reputation at least. Once we kind of got into that contract model, we managed to get paid milestone payments, which means as you deliver aspects of the game, as you deliver various stages of development, you get paid money. So that was kind of the way we worked, and we were cutting it a bit fine, given that we normally got paid on the 15th of the month, and we had the salaries going out on the 20th of the month. So if the check hadn't come in by the 17th, you started to sweat a little bit. But that was kind of just the way that we had to run it early on, and it got us through.
You look like you've been having fun, Teresa. I've just been practicing for the big water ski show. It was great. You get to wear really cool costumes and do lots of tricks. You can collect flags, go over jumps, and ski through gates. You've just got to try it.
The team also invested in building its reputation and relationships within the industry.
Yeah, getting over to the US, meeting people face to face, delivering concepts, trying to get a handle on what we needed to provide to get a deal done. So again, early on, quite naive to the whole process, and I guess we really thought that it only came down to the product or the quality of the idea or the quality of the work, but there's actually so much more that sits around it, not only in terms of getting a deal, but actually on the other end, where you try to sell a product. I think there are a lot of examples in the marketplace where quality is not necessarily the determining factor of whether something's successful or not.
And as to what the other determining factors can be?
Well, certainly marketing and PR has a lot to do with it. Licenses, regardless of whether licensed games generally are quality or not, but licenses can be a big deal. Your management of the community, all sorts of things like that, that sometimes I think from the developer's standpoint can seem quite secondary because we want to believe that quality is all that matters. But the real world doesn't quite work that way.
Here in Los Rouletas, we've said you to that zombie apocalypse. That's right, Sidheads. We've got the badass cars. We've got the howling undead. We've got your favorite drivers mowing down everything in their path.
Being based in New Zealand can create additional difficulties for developers.
I think there's a couple of drawbacks. Certainly the tyranny of distance. It's less of an issue now with digital distribution and being able to get to audiences effectively. We can reach into every market almost via those digital channels. But that being said, it still can be hard to build relationships with investors, with gaming press, with mass market media. So some of those more businessy things outside of the actual kind of development and delivery of the content can still be quite hard to sort of evolve over time. I think perhaps the other drawback that we have is, as New Zealanders, we tend to be both a little bit naive about the big bad world sometimes, and just how cutthroat it can be out there, and just how crowded the marketplace is for trying to capture the attention of consumers. Is quite hard to get hold of. And on top of that, New Zealanders tend to be very humble, almost apologetic about a lot of what we create. So we don't want to try and overhype something. We don't want to crow about a creation because it's kind of built into us that we should feel slightly embarrassed that we should do that. So when New Zealanders kind of take their content out into the marketplace, we do it a lot of the time very sheepishly. We don't support it enough with kind of aggressive marketing or aggressive PR. And that means that a lot of the message surrounding our content can fall quite flat. And that means that we're perhaps not giving the great stuff that we create the best opportunity within the marketplace.
The benefits are somewhat more intangible, but highly relevant to the games industry.
New Zealand has a very interesting culture that means that a lot of the entertainment that we create here is simultaneously both very unique, but also easily digestible by North American, European, Australasian markets. We have this culture where we've been influenced quite heavily by the UK, by the US, by Australia. We have this sense of how entertainment from those different regions is packaged, and that it comes across movies, television, music, as well as video games. But at the same time, we kind of have this very interesting creative drive, creative ability here to be able to turn around something quite unique and tell very compelling stories, and we've seen that play out across those different entertainment industries. And I think as I look across the landscape of what's being produced by New Zealand game development companies, there is very little there that is kind of carbon copy, clone type stuff. Much of it has very unique aesthetics, interesting gameplay mechanics, very interesting new spins on the way things have been done, or completely new concepts. And I think that's really one of the key opportunities that we have here, is that we're kind of this pool of creativity that really hasn't been tapped as much as it could be.
She's current marquee title is Rugby Challenge, a game based on our national sport. She believes sports gaming has become increasingly sterile.
You get a lot of feedback from the community that people want a simulation, they want an accurate representation of the real world sport, and that's a reasonable request. But at the same time, that's not necessarily fun, because there are elements of real world sports and real world situations that just aren't fun to have in your entertainment. You know, that's why, you know, when you're watching movies and TV, a lot of the mundane stuff of people's lives is cut out. You know, unless it drives the plot. You don't show the person going down to the mailbox and picking up their mail and then going back and eating breakfast. You know, that you may have those things, but only if they're relevant to pushing the entertainment or the narrative. So yeah, you know, we've tried to bring in elements which just draw you into the world of rugby more and more from the perspective of the coach or the player than I think you know, other rugby games or even our rugby league games in the past have done. You know, I think when you're faced with a benchmark like FIFA or Madden, combined with a budget which is a slither by comparison, it can be hard to try and reconcile that benchmark with what you're going to be able to achieve. And I think, you know, you end up kind of focusing on things that don't necessarily matter. They're important to get right, you know, in terms of likenesses and stats and, you know, accurate stadiums, and you need to have that, but you need to have that kind of special sauce, that magic on the top as well. And if you concentrate too much on creating an accurate simulation without trying to understand what it's like and what you're trying to create, then I think you lose something along the way. And that's where I think, you know, not only rugby games have gone wrong, but a lot of sports games in general have just lost sight of what's important, which is the essence of the sport, what it's like to run down the field with people chasing you, you know, and they're going to put their body on the line to stop you. And you know, that's what we tried to bring into the game, and that's what I think, you know, in its very rudimentary early polygonal graphics form, you know, that's what Jonah Lomu had. It had that sense of excitement and drama that, you know, has kind of been lost along the way somewhere.
They don't build them like that anymore.
I think for us, the more strategic side of the game is something that we would have liked to have fleshed out a lot more, and that's certainly, you know, right at the top of the list for a sequel. You know, I think with all of the sports games that we've done, there's always something that you can add, and you know, we know, regardless of how far we got with this first title, and I think surprisingly we actually got quite far, because when you look at the amount of content and features and platforms that we're dealing with, there's a lot of game there, and there's a lot of depth, and I think there's going to be a lot of people playing this game for a long time. At least I hope so. But there's already a list, a wish list for Rugby Challenge 2 on the forums, because people have an understanding of how the package is shaped up and what they're going to get. There's always more that you can add. In the same way that there's always more that you can add to Madden or FIFA or whatever. So it's an insatiable beast. And again, hopefully we feel we've concentrated on the right things and created a really solid foundation. And we'd like to take this further if the opportunity stacks up the right way.
The growing opportunities for success in New Zealand are a result of our former inability to compete with the Australian development industry and the console market.
My view on the fall of the Australian industry is certainly partly related to the shift in the dollar. That had a big impact on Australian studios being able to compete for the types of work that they were competing for, which was generally licensed console work for hire. And it's been interesting to see kind of the contrast between how the Australian industry has evolved since the industry kind of completely had to reinvent itself as a result of the global financial crisis, and how New Zealand has kind of responded to what has turned out to be an opportunity. Because so much of the Australian industry was built on console work for hire without enough reinvestment, in my opinion, in digital distribution and building creative IP and building technical IP. And New Zealand was kind of in this interesting place where companies had struggled for so long to get those work for hire deals that we actually ended up just having to go out and a lot of companies just had to start distributing themselves and doing downloadable games and smaller games and flash games. And that's kind of where the market shifted to. So we have a lot of these little success stories because we kind of almost stumbled into it, and now have this huge opportunity when now is the right time, if we can capitalize on it, to be a leader.
Capitalizing on that opportunity, she opened a smartphone games publishing arm called Pickpock.
So it was about 2005 when we first really started to understand that the retail side of the industry was going to hit a big decline at some point. And we were fortunate that we were working with an analyst at the time who, even that far out, was able to tell us that at the end of 2008, we were going to see a Christmas period where there were more retail titles released in North America than any other year in history. And that in itself was, a huge red flag, because there were certainly already at that time starting to be big winners and big losers. And unfortunately, with limited shelf space, the number of big winners tends to be fixed. And if you just add more product to the channel, the number of losers increases. So we knew that really to keep control of our own destiny, we had to move towards digital distribution, and that was where we really started developing PSN and Live Arcade and Steam-based content as early as 2005. So we had some success with GripShift, with Shatter, which we took to those channels. And had always kind of kept an eye on the mobile market and sort of tried to dabble in it from time to time, but every time we looked at it, we realized that there would be a huge investment in terms of retraining artists or developing new technologies and new processes, or bringing new expertise on board that we just didn't have. And I guess the opportunity that Apple delivered to us was that they brought smartphone technology up to a level where suddenly our console experience, our PC experience, our handheld experience was relevant because the iPhone had the power to be able to run the sorts of stuff that we wanted to be able to build at the minimum level. And at the same time, they offered a solution for developers to actually control their content rather than having to go through mobile phone content aggregators, which has been a huge barrier in the past, and a huge loss of value for developers who had to give away most of the revenue in order to just get up on the store. So around about the middle of 2009, we saw that opportunity via Apple, specifically via the iPhone, to be able to create content and distribute that on our own terms, and at a quality level that we were happy with. So we started a distribution label, Pickpock, which we were going to publish our stuff under. And we kind of separated out the brands because at the time we weren't really sure exactly how sophisticated iPhone games or smartphone games were going to be. So at that time there were still a lot of fart apps and soundboard apps at the top of the charts. So we kind of wanted to distinguish between the two outward-facing labels, and but quickly we sort of saw how it all evolved very rapidly, and what kind of started off as a 6-month experiment with a fixed budget that said, let's see what we can do in the space. If after this period of time, we find we're successful enough, then let's keep going. And we found that we did meet our expectations, and have continued working in the space since then, expanding out to iPad and Android, and I guess the platforms have continued to evolve and continue to raise their capabilities as well with iPhone 4 and iPad 2 and what we're seeing in the Android space as well. So it's an interesting opportunity which has different characteristics again from that kind of live arcade PSN model, where your investments are smaller, your time to market is smaller, and the opportunity is different. You need to sell a lot of units in order to make real money, whereas a moderately successful game on a console can offer great rewards. But I think we're starting to be able to recreate our success on a more consistent basis now, and that means we're seeing kind of more consistent ROI.
Given the success of Pickpock and the increasing opportunities for greater still, it's possible she will move away from retail game development altogether.
Oh God, my plums!
I've done a couple of interviews asking the question of are we abandoning retail, and the answer is kind of, but the time frame is really the question. Certainly we made a decision at the end of last year that we didn't want to be doing console work for hire for the sake of it, and wanted to be much more strategic about the projects that we took on. Wanted to take on projects which gave us the opportunity to be successful both creatively and financially. That was a difficult kind of place to get to during 2009-2010, because everything changed so fast in the industry that you kind of had to grab and take whatever you could at the time. And at the time, the alternatives, whether it be layoffs or I don't know, layoffs being the big one, seemed untenable. And I guess, you know, having experienced a couple of tough years where we signed ourselves up to work on some very short turnaround products with very low budgets, but high expectations. You know, that had a big impact on the team. That we got to the point where we said we just really don't want to repeat that. So we've have made a decision, I guess, which is perhaps maybe it's a bit more New Zealand or maybe a bit less. I struggle to really decide, but less practical and more principled, and really trying to do something which really gets back at what we got into the industry for in the first place. You know, to create games that are interesting, that have impact, and to do so on our own terms. So there are opportunities in the retail space that we feel passionate about. There are opportunities that we think are good for the studio in terms of building relationships, building technology, building expertise, building a fan base, and we'll just have to see what comes across our door. But we're trying not to go cap in hand and pursue anything and everything that comes our way, because that's a downward spiral. And ultimately, I guess probably what will happen is retail will fade over time, and we'll be back in a place where everything becomes just about developing games again, and less about the particular model. But hopefully different people will be in control. Yeah, I think 2015 is my date for when the power of retail tips in favour of the power of digital distribution. It is becoming harder and harder to get product into retail, and at the same time the market is getting more and more splintered with so many different devices. And over time, bandwidth is increasing, the costs of downloading something are coming down, the time frames of downloading something are coming down. So I think when you combine that with the advantages of games always being available, kind of having this concept of an unlimited shelf life, having unlimited shelf space, the opportunity that retail provides is a lot diminished. So 2015 is kind of my time frame that sort of I'm keeping an eye on in terms of where we're seeing bandwidth going, where we're seeing download speeds going, and kind of loosely tying that into what's probably going to happen in this next console hardware generation, because that's kind of likely to be sort of in the middle of it, and we'll probably see things changing quite radically there as well.
That new generation is imminent. Already, Nintendo has announced its next offering in the home console space, the Wii U.
It's a system we will all enjoy together, but also one that's tailor-made for you.
Nintendo Chief Executive Satoru Iwata has said smartphone game development is drowning the industry and that software craftsmanship is vanishing. She disagrees.
At the risk of disagreeing blatantly with industry veterans, I think the perception that smartphone development somehow is corrupting the art of game development, or eating away at the creativity, whatever the sentiments might be, and certainly there's been a lot of that sentiment that has passed through the kind of traditional console handheld industry over the last couple of years. I think there are elements of truth in what they're saying, in that when you democratize the development tools and you kind of open up the distribution channels, yes, you're going to get a lot of cloned games, copycat games, you know, people ripping off other people's IP directly. You know, Nintendo has certainly been subjected to you know, sprites and characters and things being ripped directly out of their games and reused. But I think at the same time, the creativity that we're seeing come through and the lower cost model, and combined with that open distribution, has meant that we're seeing new levels of creativity and new levels of experimentation that we haven't seen for many years now. And I think, you know, the sentiment that it's somehow corrupting game development is perhaps born a little bit out of fear and uncertainty over what it's going to mean for the traditional industry long term. You know, I think we're seeing such interesting stuff that's happened in other entertainment channels when you democratize the tools. You know, when people were able to get hold of Super 8 cameras or VHS cameras, you know, being able to create their own home movies or move on to amateur filmmaking, through to, you know, the quality that you can produce, you know, right now with a Canon 5D, to produce something that's, you know, essentially feature film quality, has done amazing things for film and television. You know, that's kind of Peter Jackson's background, you know, kicking around with low quality stuff that he could get his hands on and just pulling stuff together, and you know, but that set him on a path that allowed him to shape his craft and become one of the most well-respected people in his field in the world. And you see that again with music and you know, the whole electronica movement and how that was born, and you know, all different forms of hip-hop, and you know, what we're seeing across, you know, things like YouTube and stuff now. And there's a lot of bad content out there, and a lot of it is terrible. In fact, you could say that most of the content is terrible. But at the same time, there is probably more variety and a higher level of quality stuff than there's ever been before. And I think it's very early days in the smartphone market right now. And certainly even earlier days in the tablet market. But as people mature, as people become familiar with the skills, as they become more expert in the technology and the tools, as children just grow up having access to this stuff, you know, imagine the possibilities of having the whole population able to have access to content creation tools and being able to distribute that. So yeah, there's going to be people creating bad content, but there's now systems in place that will enable stuff that people could never have dreamed of 20 years ago being created in a back room somewhere by some guy or girl that, you know, can change the world.
That was a chill out track brought to you by Primo.